Announce our next speaker, Gene Wellborn with the Department of Commerce, and his presentation on the reappraisal of homes, commercial property, and agricultural land. Mr. Wellborn is a 28-year-old, The other thing I was thinking about that's really good after the last presentation, I thought this is really good that there's no like test or of comprehension after that last presentation. You're a 28-year veteran, employee and manager with the Montana Department of Revenue. You were named by Governor Steve Bullock as the department's director in May of 2018. Gene has a critical leadership role as the department moves forward with its work in tax administration and alcoholic beverage control. He assists with all upper-level executive and management activities, including planning, budgeting, policy development, taxpayer affairs, personnel, budget, public information, and department activities. In addition, Gene is responsible for coordinating legislative work for the department. Wellborn worked as the department's business and income tax division administrator for 9 years. He was responsible for the compliance and valuation of the state's tax programs associated with all state taxpayers. These taxpayers include the largest multinational businesses, Montana's Main Street businesses, and individual Montanans. Wellborn began his career with the department in 1990 as a centrally assessed property appraiser and has had ever-increasing responsibilities since then. Wellborn graduated from the University of Montana with a degree in finance. I ask you to welcome Mr. Wellborn.
Thank you, Mary. And just a couple things, housekeeping. First, is Tom in the room? That's right. I don't know if he knows this or not, but Mary Whittinghill hired me in 1990. So if Tom, you have any issues with me, you can blame that on Mary. Also, I wanted to do a couple quick introductions. You all met me already, but with us today is Ed Kaplis. He's our tax policy and research director. We just recently, not that recent, I guess, pretty recently hired Shauna Helfert as our deputy director, and I think a lot of you know Shauna from her days of in the liquor administration division regulation side of our business, not on the consumption side. And Gordy Collin. Gordy is our new property assessment division administrator. Gordy's been with us for about 5 years as our deputy administrator. Came to us from SITSD and OPI and points beyond. And it's kind of like old deja vu week for me a little bit, because in this room we have 3 former property assessment division administrators. Randy Wilkie being there. I was shocked to see Randy. I thought he retired and moved south. And we got Gordy here. So we got property assessment division covered. So whatever I messed up or forget to say, I'm sure 4 of these people, and actually Shauna was property assessment division administrator. So you're all in really good company. I'm the only one that doesn't know anything about property assessment. I don't have that much. And I just had a couple of slides to go over here. All of you in the room know this. My background is more on the centrally assessed side, and I know a lot of you from that world, but over this last fall, I've been somewhat on the conference tour, and so we kind of go over who has what responsibility, and I think at times taxpayers property owners get a little bit, they blame either the treasurer for taxes or county commissioners or the department. We all get rolled into one group of tax collectors and bad people, I think. But this just goes over a little bit of who has what responsibility. Of course, we have market value determination responsibility. The legislature sets the tax rate, what's exempt, and that kind of thing. And then, of course, the counties establish the new levies and the budgets, and then the new levies, of course. Montana, as you all know, is a classification system when it comes to property. We have right now, what is that? 15 classes of property. For some reason, class 11 got done away with. But we got 15 classes of property. All of them are on the annual cycle, reappraisal cycle, except for ag land and class 4 residential, commercial, and industrial. And then forest land is still at a 6-year cycle. I should have gone too far, too fast here. I wasn't going to go over a lot of how we do a reappraisal, but just generally for residential property, of course, we have a sales approach and for most property, but then also we use the cost approach on some of the property with special types of residential or commercial property. For commercial, we can also use the income approach, and that's the same with industrial property. We use all of those to come up with our market value. So what the legislature has done is established reappraisal cycles, and up until 2015, we had basically a 6-year reappraisal cycle for all class 4 property. And for ag, ag's a little funky, and we had like a 30-year reappraisal cycle there for a while. But in 2015, the legislature adopted a 2-year reappraisal cycle. So we're on the 3rd reappraisal cycle that'll start in 2019. So we've had 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, and then this one. So each year, we go through this reappraisal process where we review all property in the state, residential, commercial, ag property. Ag's valued on a production capacity, commodity prices, and that kind of thing to come up with market value. But residential and commercial, we use those approaches of value to come up with our overall market value. This table here is just the market value of all the residential, commercial, and ag. So in 2018, we had an overall net market value for residential property of $101 billion. What our staff is working on right now is coming up and finalizing our 2019 reappraisal value, sorry. We won't have that truly finalized until February, March, sometime in there. So what we've done with Ed's team's help and our property assessment team is we've come up with an estimate of what we think that reappraisal value looks like for all residential and commercial property. And so you can see what we're anticipating in 2019 is an increase in residential property of about 8.5%, commercial property just over 11%, and then ag up about 3% for an overall increase statewide of 8.6%. What we're also required to do by laws is also present to the legislature if, as a result of reappraisal, what would the tax rates do if we were to mitigate the reappraisal impact and basically leave everybody revenue neutral in those classes of property? So this next slide is what would happen to the tax rates. So on that first slide, we talked about market value, tax rates, and then tax bills. The current rates for the tax rates on residential are what's shown here. To mitigate that increase that was on that prior slide, the tax rates would have to go down to these values. Now we haven't done mitigation in Montana since the last 6-year cycle, so that would have finished up in 2014. Since we've been on the 2-year reappraisal cycle, we haven't done any mitigation. The legislature has chosen just to take that increase and let it apply and flow through to property owners. So on this local level, mills float to make up that difference essentially. On the state level, on the 101 mills, it's a benefit to the state general fund. We just collect that much more money. So this will be a decision that comes to the legislature this session to decide or determine if they want to try to mitigate the effects of reappraisal. What's difficult about that is this is a statewide average increase. So if you apply a statewide average increase to everybody, there's going to be winners and losers. So some jurisdictions are going to be benefited by the reduction, and some jurisdictions are going to be harmed by or there'll be a bigger shift. That's not really harm, but there'll be a different shift of taxes to property owners. So that's always really a difficult thing to work through. On the total, the state would absolutely be revenue neutral, but at a local level, you'll see shifts of property or value depending on what, just what that tax base is in the community and that kind of thing. I don't want to get in front of the break or hold you up on break, but that's really what Bob had asked me to talk about. But I also want to talk a little bit about taxes and where they go and kind of a new dynamic that we're looking at. Because I think what I've heard during this session, there might be some discussion of taxation of businesses essentially assessed, and maybe there's a time to look at those, and are those folks being treated fairly and equitably. So I wanted to give you a little bit of information. All of this information comes out of our biennial report that Ed and his team are updating right now. So this is just a table out of the biennial report that just tells you where the property tax revenue goes and basically generally to what jurisdiction. What's the biggest, local tax revenue, that state revenue fund, the largest percentage of that goes to local, or to schools. You can see that here, the state, local schools, countywide schools. All of that adds up to about almost 60%. So almost 60% of our property tax revenue goes to schools. This is just a chart, if you like charts. It's the same thing. So this table breaks out by class, market value taxable, and then our estimate of property taxes paid. And so you can kind of get a sense of the total taxes paid, of the $1.7 billion in taxes, what group of taxpayers pay the most in taxes. And it's, the lion's share of taxes are 65% are in that class 4 category. And you can see where some of the other taxes landed. This also illustrates the tax rates and how different tax rates impact what folks pay. So ag land, for example, is $6.7 billion in market value, but the taxes they pay is something less than that because their tax, when you, in relative terms to the other classes of property, because the tax rate is much lower. And that's the kind of same situation with forest land. In a different look, what we did here is try to take the classes of property and group them into property type or business segment. And so you can see that if you group all of the residential, which is just that class 4 bundle, and you take a percentage of what residential property owners pay to the total, residential property owners pay that about 48% of the tax base. Commercial, so this would be real property, commercial, and personal property, is in that 15% range. And I think of interest to a lot of folks in this room is the centrally assessed folks pay about almost 25% of the taxes in the state. And the natural resource group is low, but this is just the class 1 and class 2 number. If it was a mine with commercial or industrial property, they're going to be up in the commercial number. Now that I say that, Ed, is that personal property is not included? We did break up personal property. Yes. I'm sorry. I said personal property was included in that commercial. That's not. That's just the personal property. But what we started doing, and this was, we've always done this as an agency, but we were trying to get better at it. And we were actually in 2013, Representative Essman passed a bill that required us to take a look at exempt property and get a better handle on what property is exempt and just get it out in the public. We have it on our website. What we're going through right now is trying to value what exempt property, what that value of exempt property actually is. Ed's team took a crack at that. This isn't a complete picture of the exempt property. So what they did is they looked at all of the property that's exempt. So it might be churches, it might be nonprofits, it might be intangible personal property. What's that? DAV for the disabled veterans break. we total all of that up, and our estimate would be, is if you took all of that property, added exempt property to the total taxes paid, and you assumed was taxes paid, exempt property would make up almost 12% of the pie. That all makes sense to everyone. It's our first attempt at this. We don't have, for example, federal property in there or state-owned property. I'm not sure we'd actually end up doing that. Federal we couldn't do anyway. But that's not in there. We don't have some of the exempt property all done. We don't have like some of the colleges valued or their exemption in this part. But from what we know, and our best guess, if exempt property was taxed, you could see how the shift, what would change. So in that prior slide, residential property was at 49%. If exempt property was taxed, that would drop down to 44%. Centrally assessed would be the same. So they would bear about 12% of the burden, tax burden, if they were taxed. And you know, the best part of this presentation is we didn't talk about fee. We didn't talk about guilty. Because I don't know anything about it, that's why I pawned that off on you. That's what I got. Any questions?
Keith, so what was the percent of the increase of the other classes of property, the centrally assessed? Do you have those?
No, Senator, we don't. I can get that for you. We don't, because it's done annually, you know, there's no mitigation ever done. But we, I would say essentially assessed probably goes 3 or 4% a year, maybe increase, something like that. It really, it depends on the big players. You know, it just depends on, you know, where we land with our biggest utility, where we land with the railroad, and that kind of thing. They can make a big difference in the total.
So Gene, when you figured your percent growth in residential and commercial property, is that the number with new property backed out, or is that the total growth?
It does not include new property. And I should have said, it's just like the earlier presentation, I'll pass it around. That increase is really going to be much different in certain areas. So Gallatin County is going to have a much, much larger increase in residential property values than the rest of the state. So what we're seeing is it really just follows the mountains. You know, that's where you're going to see an increase in residential property much higher than the 8%. It's going to be probably 15-20%. We're still working through that, but
Where you think that Flathead County, Lake County issue is going to be back?
yeah, I think that will, yeah, I think so. I think Gallatin County probably is going to jump in there. Missoula. You know, but the problem with mitigation too is, you know, on the state side, it costs money to do that. And in the budget situation we're in, you know, where does that money come from to mitigate? So that's a tough deal.
Gene, do you have, you know, on your slide about showing the exempt property, do you have any perspective of how that has changed over time? Has that grown significantly?
We really don't, because we just, with the exception of intangible personal property exemption, that we can tell you, we can do that. That's kind of a big number. But with the other type of properties, the nonprofits and that, we just are really kind of diving into the value portion of that. We've always known that they were exempt, we just didn't ever try to put it. That's all I got.